11 is now live onto the live servers. That's a little redundant, but it is what it is. We're doing this live over on Twitch, so you can see Twitch chat over here on the left-hand side. A little bit different from previous meta-analyses, but that's okay. New set, new me, new angle. So that's always very exciting. But there's a lot to cover, a lot of things to talk about. There's a shitload of reroll boards, standard boards, legendary boards, ways to play around like the 5 costs and just everything. There's a crap ton to cover. So, you know, grab a drink, grab some food, chill. All right, we're gonna be here for a while. This is gonna be, I think, my estimate's like an hour, roughly an hour. I don't know how long the video is gonna be, but it's gonna be like an hour. But let's just get started. There's a lot to talk about, but don't worry, we'll get to it together. So it'll be all good. So let's go over. We'll go over mainly the comps, and then we'll talk about a little bit about the itemizations and strong augments. But because it's the first meta-analysis of the whole patch, there's a lot to cover. But anyways, let's get started. So first off, let's go in order. 1-cost rerolls. So the most common 1-cost reroll board has got to be Kog'Maw reroll. This is probably the most played line because I think out of all of the 1-costs, this is the one that I think most people are finding success with. Itemization wise, blue buff is really necessary. This is a little outdated actually because I've had these tabs since like the beginning, since like the first day of the set, and a lot of it was actually for PvE. So you might be seeing me changing some things up here and there, but Kog'Maw, surprisingly enough, used to be on the PvE. Sniper's focus was like, oh, it enables Kog'Maw and the Kog'Maw is good. But it turns out, no, Kog'Maw is just good, period. And the itemization is actually really similar if you remember Ahri from set 10. It's a really similar itemization of blue buff, Nashers, and Rabadons. Nashers is actually his preferred mana item from what I can understand. But if you have blue buff Nashers, this is like Turbo Bis. You just cast infinite and just gets a lot of the cast off. You just want Kog'Maw and casting constant, because it will eventually be able to clear the entirety of the board. Obviously, you are rolling on 4, just, you know, down to 32 or whatever, trying to hit the Cog 3 or the Cho 3. And then you slow roll on 5, trying to hit everything else. Cho'Gath 3, Cog 3, you don't really necessarily need Cho'Gath 3, but it's definitely nice to have. He will be your main tank if you happen to find him. Otherwise, you can just play around something like Bard instead, or not Bard, sorry, TK the Frog, and then you can just start playing further and further into the Mythics line. You just eventually play vertical Mythics. Kayle 3 here is marked as well. This is actually just completely optional, and most of the time, I don't even really go for it. But sometimes Kayle 3 does pop up here and there, and she can just be like a TG holder, and that's totally fine. But again, Cho 3, Cog 3, this is the biggest, like the main line, if you will. There is Heavenly in here, but again, the reality is that most of the time you're playing a board that looks something like this, and then eventually, well, actually, it's more like this. Or no, it's not, sorry, Nico's Mythic. It's like this, and then eventually, as the game progresses, you start pushing level, you make it back to 50, you hit all your units, you start slowly taking in more and more Mythics, and then voila, you are at 7 Mythic. For obvious reasons, Mythic Crest is super fucking good in this set, or not this set, but this comp in particular, because it just lets you have a +1. Obviously, you don't want Malphite here, it could be a different behemoth, doesn't really matter who it is, something like, I don't know, fucking Ornn. This unit is a beast, but Ornn can be really great as well. A lot of cool ways to play this line, so highly recommend checking it out. Really, really solid for 1-cost reroll lines, especially a lot of Kog'Maws, a lot of Cho'Gaths, Malphites in the early game. Second one, this one, I wouldn't really recommend this one as much in terms of 1-cost reroll. The biggest reason why is because Ahri Yasuo is great. It's good for openers, but unless you are hitting and naturally a lot of the units and a lot of good items for these units, I don't know if I would really recommend it. Ahri's itemization is pretty similar as well, but it's just blue buff, Rabadons, and Gunblade. You can have other things too, like Shojin, Adaptive, these are all fine. Yasuo, really weirdly enough, is a tank. This was something that for whatever reason I couldn't really wrap my head around at the beginning of the set. But he's a tank. He wants tank items, things like gargoyles, things like warmogs. You'll see gargoyles popping up very frequently as we go throughout more and more of this meta-analysis, because gargoyles is a fucking fantastic item. It is just so good in this set. You have a lot of tanks who really like to solo frontline, so Yasuo being one of them. Syndra is great. Eventually, once you hit the Ahri and the Yasuo, you want to eventually try and play around the Syndra, try to cap out with 7 Faded. It's just the 1-cost reroll is very simple, just vertical. Not much to really think about. Syndra itemization, blue buff is absolutely necessary, but it's literally the exact same as Ahri, Rabadons, and Gunblade. And this is actually one of the main reasons why a lot of people don't really play the reroll line too often. It's because Ahri can perfectly hold every Syndra item. So just throw this shit onto Ahri, just tempo with Faded, because Faded is a very strong opener, and then you'll eventually play into Syndra. I just realized I didn't mark anything about openers, but we can talk a little bit about openers at the end, because I think it's a little important to know like what units to hold in the early game. But we'll go over that a little bit later after we go through all of the compositions. But that's basically it for 1-cost reroll. There is some talk about Kha'Zix reroll being like a thing. I'm not too well versed in it, so I'm not gonna talk about it too much. I don't think it's that good, but I've definitely seen it happen from time to time. So it can be okay. It can be okay. I'm not saying it's bad. I don't fucking know. I've not seen it do too hot. But anyways, going on to 2-cost rerolls here. Teemo reroll. Teemo reroll has got to be fucking disgusting. It's so good when you hit. It's so foul. 2 healthy really enables the composition. For obvious reasons, you're playing a bunch of 2 costs. You're playing this isn't even like the 2 cost variation. Actually, I believe this is the 2 healthy one. But you just play a shitload of 2. It's literally all 2 cost units except for Silver. Because you get the trick shot in for Teemo. Fucking foul. Like, not okay. This is so disgusting. This composition loves having like basically infinite rods. For Teemo specifically, having blue buff, Rabadon's Gunblade, really solid. You don't have to play these 2 healthy variation. Obviously, if you hit 2 healthy, you can kind of just force Teemo and just cruise by and you'll be okay. But otherwise, you eventually play what is more of the standard line, which is after you hit the Teemo 3, you go into 4 bruisers for trick shot. Yes, I believe this is correct. I'm a little hesitant because I don't remember my exact slides, but yeah, I believe this is correct. But the 4 bruiser line is as well. This is like sort of the main line, if you will, outside of 2 healthy. And don't get me wrong, 2 healthy can still use this line. It's fine. The only difference is that, oh, by the way, sorry, the kayle is always shred. It's the green one, in case anybody was wondering. But this is just a little bit more consistent just because you're not playing like a bunch of shitter like low quality units like I mean Aatrox is a good quality unit, don't get me wrong, but it's gonna probably be unitemized. Shen Yorick is not that great. They're okay in the like, you know, mid game, but going into the late game not that hot. Things like gargoyles, things like your warmogs, again Galio 2 is a really strong tank line, really solid. So again, things like Vow as well, you might see Vow popping up really often as well. Gargoyle, Vow, these are very common items in the current meta, but obviously you want to save your tiers for Teemo, but then if you have extra ones, Vow is super solid. Sylas is also just an incredible like secondary tertiary carry as well, so you'll see Sylas popping up here and there, sort of like a flex unit. You'll see a lot of pro players opting for things like Thief's Gloves on Sylas because Sylas with TG is a fucking beast. He's not gonna carry your team. If you are main carry Sylas, you might be a fucking moron, but just kidding. But no, I'm not. But like, it's not good. But he'll dish like 4k, 5k HP, and it's okay. It's okay. It's actually fine. Really good unit, especially 2-star. But anyways, this is like the main line. Shiv is on board here, not that necessary. But I will say though, eventually this shred that you get from kayle is like not enough. Eventually you do want some better types of shred, so eventually trying to find the Shiv, trying to find the spark somewhere down the line is ideal. Obviously this doesn't have to be TG. I mean, it's nice if it is, but Ionic Spike, totally fine. It's super solid nonetheless, especially on Sylas. Again, it's absolutely good unit. Just throw some healing items on him and he's good to go. Anyways, moving on. Going into the next one, this is the Senna Gnar comp. This was sort of the comp that a lot of people were talking about, but right before the patch hit onto the live servers. And you still see it from time to time. It's actually still very solid. It's sort of a line that you wouldn't really think of by yourself. It's one of those things, is I believe China came up with it initially, but it's a really interesting line. It basically utilizes 2 Dryad, 3 Ink Shadow. Everything fits like very concisely onto the board here. And the idea being is that a lot of the shadow, or rather the ink shadow items, are great on Senna and on Gnar. The big ones to take note of, I believe, are Tattoo of Force, which is the one that I believe Gnar just insta stuns like the opponents for like X amount, like a short period of time. But it's super fucking solid. Senna also really likes what is it? I believe it's Bombardment. I think Bombardment's really strong. It's basically Runaan's Hurricane, but better. There's Tattoo of Fury, which is great as well. It gives her a little bit of that extra attack speed. Her best one is Tattoo of Toxin. Toxin is basically like a Morello. You just get to get a little bit of damage in there, but it also just gets a little bit of the wound in there. It's one of her BIS. In terms of itemization, Ginsu's Last Whisper is, from what I understand, the best / optimal. The reason being is that a lot of people might be like, oh, but if you have, you know, Ginsu's on Senna, isn't that kind of weird? Like, don't you just want her to cast and kill everything? And it's true, but the problem is that even with like IE Deathblade GS, the Senna isn't like one-shotting shit. It's all right, but it's not gonna do the job. So instead, you just kind of want her to be like a consistent DPS. So things like Ginsu is really nice, and it feels a lot smoother. You'll feel it as well. Aatrox 3, not necessary, but it does pop up quite a bit. Aatrox 3 is a bit of a menace as well. You'd be surprised at the amount of work it can do. It's not necessarily a tank. It is your main tank in this line, but it's not like a giga tank by any means. It's not something like a Galio. It's not something like your, I don't know, I'm like, look, I'm like, my eyes are like scrolling through all these 2 costs here. Nothing here is like a crazy tank. It's not like your Tom Kench. It's not like your, you know, like your fucking like Nautilus or whatever, right? At the end of the day, it's not really, it's not a tank. It's classified as like a magic bruiser fighter, but it's still incredibly solid. Don't get me wrong. If you get Aatrox 3, Gnar 3, by the way, if you're contested in this line, you can actually start pushing levels from what I've seen. And then Senna actually becomes kind of more of a trait bot, and that's fine as well. There's been times where I've been contested for this line before, and then I sort of opted for like this kind of a variation, and then I just started throwing items onto like an Ashe instead as like a tertiary carry, and it kind of worked out. It can get a little dicey, but it's still nonetheless still fine. But still very solid line. It doesn't win out a lot of lobbies. It's hard to cap out. Most people will cap out. As you saw earlier, I had Dryads in here as well, just to get a little bit of extra front line, and Azir is just Azir, very solid unit. The best way to cap out is eventually if you find a Dryad spat. Dryad spat is just good enough. It'll get things by, but also Dryad spat on Aatrox is actually super solid, and you just get to play 6 Dryad, which is actually pretty strong, but it's really hard to hit, so you don't see it too often. But that's basically enough for that line. And then a little bit of the EOS tech. This is the Janna reroll. Janna reroll is fucking weird for a lot of reasons. It's like, dude, like, how are you gonna have a reroll board and then just not have the trait activated? It's really weird. So, let me explain what I mean. Janna reroll doesn't give a shit about invokers. Like, Janna is a Dragonlord invoker. Invoker is not enabled. You could eventually play it. You could maybe tech into something like an Annie, I guess. But the reality is that this board is incredibly self-sufficient without Invoker. And 2 Invoker is like, it's a nice thing to have. But, like, is it necessary? No, absolutely not. The main line is basically you just play Story Weavers for that early little bit of tempo. You don't have to stay married to this, but it's just nice to have. It's just because Riven is altruist, and that opens up the Soraka as well for Heavenly, and things just tend to fit a little bit nicer. Things like the Nico 3 and Diana 3, these are not necessary, but these were sort of like happy accidents if you manage to find it. Most of the time, it's just Janna 3, tempo with it, Dragon Lord it up, and you just throw in as many Dragon Lords as you can, and eventually your board just becomes super solid with a bunch of really solid units. Also, by the way, it's always Rakan, it's never Xayah. Xayah just feels a little lackluster. She's fine if you get to Xayah too with like a trick shot setup, but it's really hard to get to. We'll explain a little bit more why later. But nonetheless, still a very solid line. Definitely recommend playing it. It's a super cool line, but it's very flip-floppy. I still, to this day, don't understand why I forgot what I was going to talk about. Anyways. Huh? Does that ever happen to you? Like, you're like, oh yeah, I really want to explain this one thing. And then you're just like, oh, I remembered. Alright, got it. My fault. We're back. This line is very flip-floppy. And the reason why is because I don't fucking know. If anybody can explain to me why Janna reroll is so flip-floppy, I would love to know. But every time I watch Janna fight, I am praying to God. I am sitting there on my hands and knees begging, like, please, for the love of God, win me the fight. And usually it does, but then sometimes it doesn't. And sometimes you feel like you hit really hard, and then you lose. But sometimes you feel like you hit fucking nothing, and then you hit, it's fine. So, I don't get it. But, anyways, it's weird. But, anyway, Janna 2, Ginsu's Archangel, super strong for stage 3. You're pretty stable for the most part. So, have fun playing it, but I wouldn't play it from behind, like, ever. I think playing this line from behind is probably a death sentence, at least from what I understand. Somebody in chat, El Hermano asked, is double Rage Blade really better than Rage Blade's Shojin? Yes, I believe double Rage Blade is Trubis, but I think Shojin is acceptable as well. But it's weird, because a lot of people in their head are like, oh yeah, if you have, like, Shojin and Ginsu's, you have a lot of attack speed plus Shojin. It makes sense, right? Theoretically speaking, that they would work well together, but I think the mana pool, 75, like, I think it's low enough that with just enough attack speed, it's good enough. You don't actually need the Shojin, and I actually think the double Ginsu is slightly optimal. I don't know exact math. Someone can correct me on it, but I'm pretty sure this is better than Shojin. But I could be wrong. I don't know. EU was initially playing Ginsu's Archangel, so I think both are fine. Anyways, This is, I think, just another variation of the board, eventually how you cap out with it. Again, you might see 4 Bruiser coming up quite often, but 4 Bruiser, this is another line you can play as well. If you don't remember, very similar to the teemo board, but 4 Bruiser is a really, really solid tank line that you can have in almost any board. Just because it fits in 3 Story Weaver so well, so you get that shred in for free. Again, it's always green. It's always shred, unless you already have a very early form of shred. Then you can go for something like red or blue, but you're not carrying Kayle, so it's gonna be green. But anyways, moving on, that's basically it for 2-cost rerolls. Going into the 3s, and the first one is duelist reroll. Now, I'm not gonna cap. I have 0 fucking games played with this duelist line. I'm not gonna pretend like I'm an expert on this line. I'm not. But I can tell you what I've seen, and I can tell you what generally the pros are trying to play around, which is a 6 duelist reroll line, and then you just tech in a shitload of Dragon Lord, and you just hope for the best. This line is specifically really good with Extended Duel, which is a specific challenger augment, which if you don't know, it's a new augment for set 11. But basically, your duelists start with 3 duelist stacks before the fight starts, and they have a little bit of Omnivamp. So it's really nice because those are the hardest stacks to hit initially, so it's actually nice. It just gets the snowball rolling faster for the duelists, which is super dope. And I didn't think too much about duelists in general. I thought it was kind of mid. But then I saw Setsuko yesterday, and I wish I had the VOD, but his VODs are off. But he played an extended duel game from 2-1, and it was the worst imaginable position ever. And don't get me wrong, Setsuko's an incredible player. He's like the Hikaru Nakamura of like TFT, because this dude, like, he will take, you give him an inch and he goes a mile. Like, he just needs the smallest opening and he will convert. And he went from what was probably like easily a bottom 2 in like the hands of 99% of players, and then he somehow managed to scrape by with a first playing this line. And it wasn't even volley 3, it was like volley 2 with like Trish 3 and like an Aurelia 1, and he was like stable on 8, and it was like the most ridiculous thing ever. It was wild. I'm gonna find I might VOD review it later. I thought it was a really interesting game. There's a lot of skill expression in that game in particular, but we'll talk a little bit more about why. But anyways, one thing to note real quick with this composition as well, a lot of people have been talking about potentially second rowing Tristana. The reason being is because second rowing Tristana is just, it allows her to jump a little faster, supposedly. I have yet to fact check this, but you might see pros putting Tristana like first or second row just so she casts a little bit faster, but also jumps quicker. I don't know what the math is on that, but it's possibly there. I'm just saying, I've seen it before. I don't know how true it is, but it's a thing. But most of the time, you're kind of stuck on 8 to try to cap out. But obviously, if you get eventually to the Aurelia 2, you are actually sitting on a pretty solid board. Just a line to consider. I think it's fine for the most part. Volley is a tank, just as your main DPS. Not much else needs to be said. But moving on, aphelios reroll. Now, aphelios reroll. This line is fucking S tier as fuck. It's admittedly very fucking hard to hit, but if you do hit it, you're looking at a good time. This was sort of the main line for the aphelios line, which was like the wardens with like Alawi and Amumu, and like with the Ornn and the Thresh for the behemoth. It really depends on what you find though, because there are like other ways of playing this. You could play, I believe nope, I don't have it in here, but you can also play other ways as well, like 5 faded if you find like that early set as well, and then you just go level 8, you drop one of these guys, probably the Amumu, and you probably play something like 5 faded with something like, I don't know, like a fucking Kindred in the back, and this is fine as well. There's a lot of different ways to play this line, but in general, aphelios 3 is a fucking menace. Things like Ginsu's Deathblade Runehands is like turbo best in my opinion, but you also have units like Ashe as well, who kind of fucking sucks, but with like some items, she is an okay secondary carry. But the reality is that if you're going to invest items into a secondary carry, just invest into Syndra. She is significantly better. Things like blue buff, gunblade, excuse me, Rabadons. Sorry, I had some hash browns earlier, and like they're not sitting the best. They're sitting pretty, but they're not sitting amazingly. But anyways, gunblade, blue buff, Rabadons, super solid. Ashe is a good Morello bot. I guess she's all right. I prefer Morello on Kindred for sure, but that is just me. But nonetheless, still super solid. If you really need like if you're desperate for a Morello holder, like Set is fine as well, I guess. Your main tank ends up usually being Thresh 3. But again, this is a really hard board to hit. It's very expensive, and 3-cost reroll in general is very expensive to hit this set, just because we are no longer playing with Chosens, and depending on who you are, that is either the best news of your life or the worst news of your life. So yeah. Trojans were like a very fucking polarizing like mechanic, by the way. Like people like you loved that shit or you hated that shit, and it was like there's like no in between. So I don't think anybody's been like too upset about encounters so far, but I don't know. I haven't tuned into Soju's stream in a while, but I feel like he might have some choice words about it. But anyways, moving on. Not much else needs to be said about that line. Alune Yone reroll. This is also, I would argue, I want to say it's like an S plus line, but this is like low S tier from my experience. Yone 3 is just such a menace, and we haven't really seen the end of Yone reroll. But, you know, again, if you loved Yone in set 10, well, guess what? He's back. So, really solid line. Again, a level 7 line. This is just the board. It's for Reroll, for Umbral. Am I having a stroke? For Reaper, for Umbral. Really simple line to play. There isn't too much else that needs to be said in here. I believe this Aatrox is the trait bot. Yep, something like this. It looks fucking ridiculous. Oops, sorry. It's, yeah, that was the trait bot. It's usually something like this on 7, and then eventually you find the fucking set. But really solid line. It's super fucking goated. Things like the itemization is very similar. Hodge, i.e. Titans, is sort of like the main line, but if like Yone loves everything. GA is fine. This Deathblade Hodge build, this is some Asa tech. Asa, if you don't know, he's a very TFT coaching. I believe it's tftcoaching.com. He has a coaching website, very successful. Go check it out if you need some coaching. I do coaching too in the Discord. But his is cheaper, so maybe just go to him. He's also better than me. But I feel like I'm a pretty good coach. Okay, I'm not gonna talk about that today. But anyways, this is some Asa tech. Asa loves math and numbers, I think, because I feel like he's always talking about numbers whenever I interact with him. But Deathblade Hodge is, I think, statistically or mathematically better. But if you have BT, then it's IE or something like that. I don't remember. I just remember Hodge Deathblade Titans being a thing. But anyways, Alune as well is super solid as a backline Morello holder. Things like the Morello Archangels is nice, so she can eventually scale up damage. And just some type of mana gen items, Shojin, Adaptive, all these are good. Doesn't really matter which one. And this is just your main line. Again, Silas is in here, just your TG holder. And any other extra items usually just go onto the Kayn. You don't really have a tank item holder in this comp. It's sort of just like burst everything down, clear the board, and if the fight goes on for too long, you might be fucked. But yeah, for Kayn, things like GA is absolutely crucial, but BT is fine as well. Kayn actually loves crit because of the way that his ability works, so things like IE, things like Hodge are also turbo bits. I think this is Bis Kayn from what I understand. If you don't know, basically he just uses crit chance, and then, what is it? I forget how the crit works, but anyways, he likes crit chance. But that's all you had to really know. We also had Yone reroll in set 7. I don't remember, maybe. But anyways, very good fucking line nonetheless. So, moving on here. I don't think there's much. Did I miss anything? For Reaper, for Umbral? Oh, one last thing. The Umbral augment in this comp is nutty. Things like Reaper Crest at 2-1, by the way, you can actually commit to this comp at 2-1 and it's totally fine. Grim Harvest is kind of mid. Gargantua Resolve enables this comp like crazy. But there is specifically an Umbral augment, which I don't remember off the top of my head. Maybe chat can help me out a little bit. Not Umbral Crest. Wrath of the Moon. Really fucking solid. I played this line during PBE thinking it was like suspiciously very strong. And then with Yone and Alune reroll nowadays, it's still like turbo fucking good. It still caps out really high compared to a lot of other boards. It's incredibly insane. Is Hodge better than BT for Yone? I would argue it is, yes. But BT is totally fine as well. It depends on the itemization. There's no like really what's better or worse. It's more like what did you hit this game and how should you itemize. But yeah. Anyways, that's basically it for that. Moving on. Bard reroll. Bard reroll is the SSS tier of this patch. It is disgusting, and it doesn't help that it's fun. Like, this is the problem. Like, if you're gonna make a comp S tier, you have to make it at least a little unfun to de-incentivize people to play it. But the problem is that it's so fun to watch Bard just go fucking turbo infinite with just infinite fucking stacks, and then he just does like 1,000 damage, and all you hear is like with like the little pings and the doots. pretty fucking fun. I'm not gonna lie. This was my favorite comp during the PvE. It's my favorite comp now, and I'm a little salty that it's so popular because it's fun. It's fun. This is the 5 mythic variation. There's actually a better variation, which we will actually go over just a little bit. But let's talk about the basics first, and then we'll talk about the more recent variation of Bard Reroll. But this is sort of the quote-unquote initial mainline, if you will. This was the initial one. But this was like a 5 mythic version of it. This is... something is wrong here. And it is Trick Shot. We are missing Trick Shot. But yeah, this was sort of like the quote-unquote initial variation of Bard. There's like a history to this. But this is like the initial, like, people are like, oh yeah, you just play vertical mythics. Makes a lot of sense to you play Bard. No, bitch. Turns out, hey, why don't we instead play 4 Trick Shot, 4 Bruiser? Welcome back, 4 Bruiser. Significantly stronger. Way more DPS, sounds pretty good, but it's hard to hit everything. So people were like, okay, well now 3 cost is too much gold. There's way too much money that you need. And to get to this point, Tom 3, Bard 3, 4 Trick Shot, 4 Bruiser, we're asking for a lot here. And we get the shredded with Kayle. Solid. But it's asking a lot here. So people have optimized the line even further, and now we're here. And this is like the sort of quote-unquote main line now of Bard, which is 2 Trick Shot with Bard and Zoe Soraka reroll and Nico reroll. So this is actually like an insane fucking line. It's actually very surprising. Raptor, shout out to Raptor. He was the first one who like let me know about this line. But this line is fucking filthy. Basically you get to stay at 7 and you're super solid. Bard 2 is already a very solid unit, and you might see a lot of pro players and high level players taking Bard 2 and just going straight to fucking 9. That's how solid this unit is at 2. And then 3-star, it's just a menace. So it's really great. Ginsu's GS Gunblade is, I believe, BIS. You could also do Ginsu's GS if you have like a healing augment, something like a harm assist. Really solid. But this is easily the main line. Obviously, Nico 3, Zoe 3, Soraka 3, these are all bonuses. You don't have to hit any of these. But I think from my experience, Zoe 3 has been a little more consistent than Soraka 3, but I could be wrong. Nonetheless, still a very solid line, and you just get to just play into a little bit of the altruist here with the Rakan, or you can just play into vertical bruisers, maybe a different heavenly unit. A lot of different ways to play the line. Nonetheless, it's super solid, but you're going to be on 7 for a very long time with this line, but it's still fine. You just roll to stabilize yourself at 4-2. Usually it's looking something like a Bard 2, something like a Tom Kench 2, or sorry, 4-1 or 3-5, depends on your game. But you know, Bard 2, Top 2 is very solid and super stable for stage 4, and then that gives you enough time to start rolling, looking for the copies to try to maybe hit Bard 3. Again, this line is so fucking contested. It is like everybody and their mom is playing this line, so don't expect to go into a game and being able to play it, because chances are 2 people at least are already thinking about it. There's also an augment we will cover later down the line, but Lucky Ricochet. Nah! You hit this? Nah, it's fucking over. If you have this board, you've basically won out. It's really hard to build a board that will outcap this playing standard. Even like 2-star legendary boards have a little bit of difficulty clearing out a Bard board. But I mean, if you have 2-star like literally every single legendary, you're chilling, obviously. But again, it's really hard to get to that point, especially with the amount of tempo you garner throughout stage 4 and 5 with Bard 2, Tom 2, and just hitting like at least one of these 3-starred, sometime at like 5-1. So most of the time, this line is fucking filthy. So again, keep it in mind. Everyone's playing it though, so good luck trying to play it, because I'm gonna try to play it every single game I get. But anyways, moving on here. This is aphelios / ashe / syndra. I'm gonna be honest, this line was a PvE line. I look at this line now, and I'm looking at this thinking like, this is just kind of turbo shit. The main reason is that Ashe 2 is just like, it's just not that good. Ashe 2 is, it sucks because Ashe should be good. She should be a strong carry, but the reality is that aphelios 2 half the time just feels just as good as an Ashe 2. I'm sorry, that's just the truth. So even though Ashe Syndra sounds like a good line, it's just not that great. I would actually stay away from this board if you can. But sorry, first off, a real 4-cost board, Lillia. Lillia 2 is pretty interesting in the sense that she's like one of the only lines that like is super solid in terms of 4 costs. We'll talk a little bit why you can see at the top here, we don't have that many to talk about, but Lillia in general is super solid. For Invoker is super great. You get to stay on 8 for a pretty long time because Annie 2, Nautilus 2, Galio 2, Silas 2. This is a very expensive board to hit. But once you have everything online, you are chilling. Mainline is for Invoker. We do have a Kog'Maw on our board here, and I know some people, XDD, Demacian Raptor, might argue that Mythics is kind of fake, news. But this line, if you can hit this entire board on 8, you're pretty solid. It's a very, very solid top 4. But nonetheless, I can see if you want it, eventually tech into Hui, and everything else makes a lot of sense. I have nothing against it. But talking about Hui in general, also for Invoker, the way you cap out with this board, it's actually super, super high. So you don't necessarily have to hit this entire board and then try to go 9. You can just hit the majority of it, Lillia 2 specifically, Annie 2, Silas 2 maybe, and then everything else is sort of optional. Depends on, what you hit, but, find your upgrades. But eventually, you can hit some really good shit. Azir Hui is how you cap out. And you'll see Azir Hui come up in the Bill Gates board as well. But it's a really cool way to cap out your board. Really, really solid line. You get 3 Mythics in. You get the Invokers in. You have Azir. You have Hui. A lot of DPS. The only thing this comp really lacks is single target focus. So actually comps like Yone can actually, make things a little bit difficult. But it's still fine. You'll still succeed. Especially if your board is looking like this in the end game. You'll still have a good time. That actually basically does it for forecasts. There's actually not that many good forecasts at the moment, which kind of sucks, which is why you hear a lot of people think about either reroll or fast 9. And sometimes play around forecast, but forecast is only to get you to 9. So that's sort of the issue with that right now. But a lot of the forecast lines are also enabled by Emblem, so we'll talk a little bit about that. First one is Faded Emblem. Faded Emblem is disgusting. 7 Faded is so good. It is so fucking good. It's only good though with the emblem though. I think it's fine without it. It's just a little harder to play because you have to fit in the Yasuo somewhere and it doesn't fit in nicely. But because you're able to get the Faded Emblem in, now you get to have snipers in and aphelios is enabled. And that is what makes this comp so much better. Aphelios 3, Thresh 3, if you don't remember already, we did talk about it a little bit. Super solid line already. But then you also get the Syndra, you get the Ornn as well, and you get the Set. Super solid line. Set, by the way, the 5 costs in general, no solid, specifically, this is a tank. Alawi last set was, a tank. Set is not a tank. Set is a damage dealer. Things like IE, things like Hodge, things like double IE. This is, this might be true base. Who knows? Set will just shoot people up in the air and just do, a million damage. As long as you position him in front of the opponent's main tank. That is the most important thing. I think people, including myself, maybe value the benching a little too much the way that his passive works. I think it's just more important that you just make sure that Set is 1, able to cast, but 2, is positioned in front of the your opponent's main target. Main tank. As long as it's in front of the main tank, it will be way more important than gaining that little bit of extra AD, in my opinion. Obviously, value it whenever you can, and if you are an APM beast, you will always be shifting your units fast enough, but in general, just position Set in front and then worry about the positioning after. I think that's just the way that I would run it. But that's just me. Anyways, super solid line. Syndra is a very solid forecast one inside of the Faded line. Definitely something to consider. Moving on, 6 Invoker. 6 Invoker is only enabled by the crest, but it's so strong, but it's so weird. You'd have to be opting to play Lillia already, and then you find the Invoker crest somewhere down the line, and you go, okay, I guess I'll try to play 6 Invoker, and then you gotta hit all the Invokers, and it's a lot to hit, it's a lot to ask for, but if you hit everything, you should be chilling. Really solid line. 6 Invoker, again, the itemization is exactly the same. Things like Gunblade, things like Rabadons, things like things like Blue Buff. People might argue with 6 Invoker you don't even need a mana item. I still think Blue Buff is fine. Just because she casts just so often, I don't see a reason why you wouldn't really have it. Even with 6 Invokers, she's still casting infinite. Gunblade, Blue Buff, and Rabadons. Again, this is an item setup you'll see time and time again. It's super, super solid. Inside of Invokers as well, you can even make an argument for Archangels. I've seen a lot of people take Archangels nowadays and being a little more open to the idea of slamming it. I don't think it's bad by any means. I think it gets a bad rep just because, not because the item is bad, but because Rabadons is that much better. You know what I mean? It's like being that kid in school where you are a solid dude. Good head on your shoulders. Decent grades. But then your mom always compares you to that one guy who's better grades. A+, 4.2 average. How the fuck you do that? and then just like a bunch of other shit, perfect scores or whatever, and then you're like getting overshadowed because something else is so much better, you know? Not a good time. Anyways, moving on. This is Yone reroll, but this is with the umbral crest. Now, umbral crest is really good because umbral crest just lets you throw it onto Kayn here, and actually in general this line is kind of nutty because it can use so many emblems. Specifically, 6 umbral is insane, but you can also get something like a Reaper emblem for something like the alune, and suddenly you can also fit 4 Reaper onto the board here, and really good fucking time. If you hit 6 umbral 4 Reaper, chef's kiss. It is so good. It is so fucking strong. Like, it's actually insane how strong this line gets. So, definitely recommend trying this out. Kayn is easily the best umbral crest holder, and then alune is the best crit chance holder. So, definitely have to keep in mind. If you really find the set early and you're like sitting on a champ dupe or something, you could try Reaper set. This is some forbidden tech. It's very fucking strong, but it's weird because you'd have to be like close to set 2 and know you're gonna probably hit it soon. And then on top of that, like, you have alune 3, but you're like, no, I'm hitting set, so I'm gonna itemize the set. It's a weird spot to be in, but if that's ever your position, consider it. It's super fucking strong. But anyway, moving on. 7 Story Weaver. 7 Story Weaver is popping up in the meta nowadays because with the emblem, it's a super easy line to play. The line plays itself out, and it's fucking strong. Kayle carry is pretty good. It's not like the best in the world, but it's super fucking solid. Just to keep in mind though, you might see that there's a Zoe 3 here. This is completely optional. You don't have to be looking for Zoe 3 or whatever. Most of the time, what people are doing is that they are playing 7 Story Weaver and they tempo with it to go fast 9, and then at 9, they try to cap out their board. But there are some times where like maybe your HP is a little too suspicious. Maybe you can try to look for the Zoe 3 variation instead, and that is fine as well. Nothing against it, but at the end of the day, this line really needs some type of a secondary carry, whether that's your Irelia, whether that's Zoe 3, whatever. In general, if you have an Irelia 1 though, you can already start throwing items on her, and that should be more than enough. You should be pretty solid, but Bar 2 is usually the best because you can just slam Ginsu's GS, and eventually once you have Irelia 2, you can just swap the items over, being chillin', have a good time, go fast 9, it is a good time. This is sort of the cheat sheet, if you will, for the Story Weaver line in general. The reason being, I think I got this from Clement's Twitter, but this is sort of like the perfect ideal condition world, whatever. The main thing to note is that, again, Kayle is green, red, green. If you don't know what these do, the first green, it gives you a little bit of shred. The red gives you stacking attack speed, basically like a Ginsu's. It's actually slightly worse. I believe Ginsu's is 6%, and then this is 5%. And then this is the Tome of Mending, which is a revive. The revive! Oh, the revive. The revive! Oh, God, it's so good. Like, it's so good. It's like, okay, I don't even know how to describe. If you play Yu-Gi-Oh, I don't play Yu-Gi-Oh, but I know Monsters Reborn is a banned card. Like, do I need to say more? Like, this is basically Monsters Reborn, and you just spawn a Galio again for free? Nah. Like, it's so fucked up. Like, it's actually so insane. One thing to note though real quick with this though is that in general, support items go nutty in Kayle. The big thing is Aegis of the Legion is gross. The reason is because this just gives a shitload of attack speed to everybody, and then Sivir will cast, giving more attack speed to everybody, so you're just buffing everything. So support items are super huge, good in this comp. Things like your Zeke's Herald, things like Aegis, and Banshees, other things too. Really solid. So just keep that in mind. I think Aegis is easily the best though. I don't think it's even close. So things like stationary support is really great in this comp. Things like support cash is really great in this comp. Just keep those in mind. Would I play this without the Story Weaver emblem though? Probably not. It's a little too difficult to fit everything in. And 5 is like good enough for stage 3, but stage 4 it's most of the time not enough unless you have a really solid board to back it up. And then Kayle acts as like your secondary carry. I've seen some people try to play it with 5 and have some level of success, but it's very difficult to pilot, so I don't know if I would really recommend it in general. Finally, for emblems, Heavenly Crest. Man, Heavenly Kayn. Heavenly Kayn is different. This is a line that was good during the PvE. It's still super solid, but it needs a lot of things to go right. Mainly, you need a heavenly crest. And then on top of that, you need to be playing heavenly units. And then on top of that, you need to find a Wukong somewhere. If you get everything, it's a solid line. It's a very solid line. And this Kayn, like, this setup is really hard to hit. It looks cheap, but it's not. Because Wukong is hard to find on 8. And you need a Kayn too. It requires very niche things to go correctly. But if you get the whole setup right, this Kayn is doing like 15-20k damage a fight. It's disgusting. You don't even need Gargantuan. It's just in here for fun. But Heavenly Crest is the big thing. And trying to angle this line in general is super fucking hard. But if you ever find the angle for it, highly recommend playing it. It's super fucking solid. But it requires a lot to go right. So I would argue it's a bit of a fake line. It's not something you really think about too often. But if you're like, oh, wait a minute, maybe I could try this. Try it. It's a really fun board. I'm not gonna lie. It's a super solid board. You don't really see like an AD melee solo carry comp anymore. But this is really fun. It's really, really solid. But anyways, finally, quickly gonna go over some of the hero augments as well. In general, I would argue the hero augments are basically all unclickable. None of these are good at the highest level, but if you want to have a little bit of fun, I don't see a reason why not to try it. Maybe do it in normals though. I wouldn't really recommend this. But first off is Garen. This is sort of the only one that is kind of takeable. Initially, people thought it was 6 Warden. But what people have realized is that because Story Weaver is good, taking Story Champion and then playing into Vertical Story Weaver, that is a bit more acceptable. I don't actually know what the stats exactly are on that. We can check it right now. Fuck it, why not? Emerald Plus stats. Hello. What is it called? Story Champion and then 7 Story Weaver. 4.1. So, pretty solid, but I believe 7 Story Weaver in general is a 4.07. So, not even that good. Anyways, try it, I guess. But it's not that good. It's genuinely not that good. Moving on, Ethereal Blades. This is something that maybe sometimes people play with, like, the Shen carry line, and it can work in the right scenarios. But in general, you are pretty much, like, if you're gonna slam against you, just play Bard. I don't get it. Just play Bard, just play aphelios. You have much better lines to play around. This is not really the best way to go. But if you have a lot of Shens, maybe try it out. I'm not saying don't ever click on this ever. It can still work in the right scenarios, but it needs a lot to go well. But I will say this. Ethereal Blades, it is super fucking capped with augments like, where is it? There's one augment that absolutely turbo enables this entire comp. And it actually becomes broken, which is not okay. Heavy Hitters is one of them, but that's not actually the most broken. The most broken is, let me see if I can find it, because I don't remember the names of everything just yet. Raid Boss. Ethereal Blades plus Raid Boss is broken. The combination is, like, I don't even mean that to exaggerate and be, like, hyperbolic. No, this combination is genuinely broken, and it should be disabled, in my personal opinion. This is not okay. If you ever see somebody have Ethereal Blades Raid Boss, it's basically like, I don't know what the stats are, but I can check real quick. What's it called? Raid Boss? Yeah, it's a 3.19. It's a 3.19 with like a 30% win rate. It's a 30% fucking win rate. That is disgusting. With a Shen 3, it's a 2.95. That, like, this is such a disgusting combination of augments. It's not okay. It kind of reminds me of, like, Prankster Gnar. If you remember, like, Gadgeting Gnar, like, back in the day from, like, set, I believe it was set 8 with, like, hero, wow, that was a while ago. Set 8 with, like, hero augments. This is what, like, Gargantuan, like, Gadgeting Gnar is kind of what Ethereal Raid Boss Shen is to me. Like, that is, like, that's how broken it screams. But, again, it's very difficult to hit everything. But if you do find it, it's basically a free top first. So, just keep that in mind. Finally, Lucky Paws. Don't click on this augment, but it's just 8 Bruiser. It's a fun line, but, losing's not fun. So, take that as you will. Finally, let's talk about Bill Gates. How to cap out your board. This is something that, I'm not gonna lie, personally, your boy's been struggling a little bit with. But, capping out your board is pretty important, and knowing how to do so is really rewarded in this set. So that's why players like Dish Soap are actually doing so well, because they know how to cap out their boards very efficiently, and that's why he's climbing like an absolute monster. So if you want somebody to watch the VODs for and try to learn how to do this, I definitely recommend the PP Dish Soap. But anyways, oh yeah, he was the first to hit GM in NA, and that was within like 4 days of the set being released. Like, what a beast. But anyways, in general, when it comes to playing around Bill Gates and legendary boards, this is actually a fundamental truth across every single Bill Gates board. But in general, unit quality surpasses your traits. And what I mean by this is that typically you can reach like 7, for example, 7 Story Weaver, right? Let's say you're playing 7 Story Weaver the whole game and you're doing a fantastic job. To cap out your board, you typically tech out of verticals. So eventually you go from 7 to 5 to 3. You usually just go from 7 to 3. And then you just start to play around higher unit quality. And then that's how you cap out. And in this scenario, we need to talk about what is good unit quality. In general, when it comes to strong unit quality, Azir is strong unit quality. Hey! Azir, wait. Wukong, very slept on. Disgusting unit. Foul as fuck. BT, Titans, GA. GA in general is really nice. Actually, blue buff is like true bis if you can manage to get like a setup that looks like this. This is disgusting. This will do so much work for you. But, really disgusting setup. Set Rakan. Even units like Udyr 2, really solid. Lissandra 2, like, you have a lot of really strong options to play around. You just have to know how to fit them in. Usually with Udyr, you are pairing it with something like the Ornn because of Behemoth, but also Dryads for your Azir. Really solid setup. You could even drop the Sage here, or Dragon Lords, I guess it's fine. But typically, Soraka and Diana will be on your endgame boards. Keep those in mind just because in general, they are pretty solid because of Altruist, because of Heavenly buffing the whole team, Sage buffing the whole team. Sage also allows Wukong. Again, it's so gross, man. Wukong is such a broken unit. It's like no one's balancing Wukong, man. But anyways, Udyr, Behemoth, solid as well. You can probably drop the Lillia. You don't really need invokers. But like, the perfect type of board would be something along this line at level 10. But that's like insane to get to. But nonetheless, you get the idea. Fucking solid line. This is absolutely disgusting. But excuse me, I don't know what it is. Sometimes when I talk for a long time, I get like a runny nose. I don't know why. Like my nose gets like stuffy. I think I have like a deviated septum or something. But anyways, that basically does it for the meta-analysis. So that covers all of the compositions. Let's quickly talk about some augments. You might notice some other tabs in here. You can ignore those. That was some like early like PB tech, and it's not that good anymore. But keep in mind, there are some augments that are pretty fucking broken right now. And obviously, it's the beginning of the set, and these are new augments that have just been introduced. But let's talk about it. First one is 2 for 1. 2 for 1 is broken. If you take it at 2-1, just hard force a reroll line, the strongest one you can think of, Bard, Teemo, etc. Fucking gross. I don't know how this made it to live. For those of you who didn't know, I think it was during playtest. During playtest, you buy that. Let me read it. Each round, get a copy of the first champ you buy that costs 3 or less. During playtest, that 3 or less didn't exist. You could buy 2 copies of a 5 cost, 2 copies of a 4 cost. This prismatic was fucking broken. It was not okay. And now it's still broken because you can still play things like Bard. You can still play things like Teemo. It just enables shit. It's like, I don't understand how this made it to live. It's so broken. As long as that 3 cost reroll is broken, this augment will always be broken. And because Bard is so good, it's so good. This is basically it's the top 4. Lucky Ricochet, same. It's still just really strong. Lucky Ricochet basically enables you to just hard force Bard, hard force Teemo, have a very fun time. Obviously, at 2-1, it's not the best. It's a little harder to pilot, but once you know you're playing Bard or Teemo, you just take it super solid. Accomplice, also really solid fucking prismatic, absolutely fucking busted IMO. It is solid at every point in the game, which is not okay. But on top of that, if you get it at 2-1, it's so broken. It's 3.57 at 2-1. And the reason it's 3.57 is because it also gives you 8 gold. I don't know how the fuck they said, hey, let's give them a support these gloves and 8 gold. If you ask me, they should disable it at 2-1. I think if you disable this augment at 2-1 and then you make it from like 8 gold down to like 6 gold, perfectly balanced. It's probably a 4.2. Solid. It's probably still like a 4 at a 3.2 and then like a 4.2 at like 4.2. Solid as fuck. Like, I actually think like that's all you need to do to like make this augment like very playable. Just disable it at 2-1. Like, if you get this at 2-1, it's disgusting. And speaking of disgusting, sharing is caring. This is a silver augment that gives you 2 gold every round. It is a silver augment that gives you 2 gold at every round. No ifs, ands, or buts. It's not like escort quest, well, the dummies gotta stay alive. It's not like switching gears, where you gotta switch your streaks up right? There's a little bit of skill expression. No, just jerk off and get 2 gold every round. I don't get it. I don't understand. This is so fucking gross. Like, it doesn't make, it makes 0 sense. The old, like, anyways. Oh, you give one. It's okay, you give one to the homie. Nah. Not good enough. I think a lot of people initially thought that this gave 1 gold to every opponent. At that point, then it's like, is this really worth it? But, I mean, maybe. I don't know. I'd be down to see what that looks like because I'm kind of curious. But anyways, just something to keep in mind. Just not that good. Also, the fact, I don't think you can actually get it at 4-2. I think this is bugged. But if you can get it at 4-2, don't ever take it at 4-2. That makes no sense. Extended duel, also really, really solid in general. Again, this is what really enables the duelist comp. So if you get this and you have a decent duelist opener, I would recommend just taking it and just going duelist and just running with it. Built different is also super solid as well. Built different is basically just 4-cost soup. And I just realized I never really talked about built different, so I guess we can talk about it a little bit. But built different solid. Don't get me wrong. It's super solid, and the main line is just as many kaises as you can. There you go. Built different. All done. But also just like I'm not gonna lie. If you ask me what is the best built different board you can build, it would probably look something like dude, I'm not gonna lie, everything else is a trait ball after this. That's it. That's the built different board. It's any 2, Kaisa 2, Kaisa 2. You're welcome. Maybe I don't know, there was some wardens, I guess. I don't know. I guess. I mean, this looks solid as fuck to me. Like, maybe Lillia. Solid. Oh, it's invoker. Sorry. Morg, maybe. Kaisa Morg. Syndra. Probably Syndra. It's probably Syndra. Disgusting. Fucking gross. Just play 4 costs. 4 costs and duplicate Kaisas. I'm sorry. Duplicate Kaisas, duplicate Annies. You could even argue to me, if this was like the conversation was like Annie, Orn 2, and then is it Orn 1 or Annie 1, it might genuinely just be another Annie. Not even cap. Are you able to get built different and Twin Terror together? I don't know if you can, but if you could, this would be broken. You know what? We can also we can check that real quick because that's I don't want to know that. Let's see. Built different and Twin Terror. Nope, not possible. So there you go. Which makes sense. Like, I feel like it would just be it's basically double trouble all over again. What about Ashe? Ashe is not good because Ashe in general is just a poor unit. It's just build difference all about strong unit quality. So you want to play units that are good unit quality. And Ashe doesn't fit the bill. So that's why she's not on there. It's just a shit unit. But yeah. Other augments to keep in mind. Storied Reaper Crest is super solid because this will just get easy to really play around. We already talked about it. Reaper Crest really solid. Just play Yone. Epoch. Not a lot of people talk about this, but Epoch is super solid, specifically because it allows you to play really high tempo, and you just get to have a very solid board, and you can just flip-flop between reroll or not playing reroll or whatever. But just keep in mind, with Epoch, specifically, Epoch, you need to keep in mind, watch your XP bar. Watch your XP bar, because there's going to be times where you're going to go, should I level here? Because Epoch leveling is not the same as standard leveling. It's kind of weird off intervals because it gives you the XP at the beginning where it gives you 6 XP. Because you're immediately thrown into level 4 at 2-1. And then it's like, okay, now you have your 2-1, but you're 2 XP extra. And it's kind of weird. And then you're kind of leveling to, you get like pre-level sometimes to 5 on like 2-2 or 2-3. I don't remember the exact intervals, but again, check out the fucking XP bar when you're playing this augment. I keep forgetting because this is something that I keep fucking up, but keep it in mind. Lastly, pumping up in general is just really, really solid. I would just take this whenever you can. It's basically a trick shot force, but you can do other things as well with it. It's super solid in basically any line. Inspiring Epitaph just seems to be solid at any point in the game for some reason. Same with Tiny but Deadly. These are augments that shouldn't be so good in the early game, but they are. Ergo, they're kind of busted. So, yeah, very, very fucking solid. Raining Gold as well is actually a lot better than people give it credit for, I think. I think this was an augment I was kind of allergic to it initially, but after a while, I was like, yeah, it's kind of good. So, I would take Raining Gold at 2-1 if you had like an econ opener. You basically have so much money that you get it. Like, you kind of just get the fast 9, and then if you are like an APM beast and you know what you're doing, you're going to have a very, very solid game. But it's hard to pilot though, I'm not going to lie. But that basically does it as well. Gargantuan Resolve is also really, really solid this set. Again, just because of Yone. But that's basically going to do it for the augments. I think that's basically it for the meta analysis. There's not much else to... Oh! One last thing. We did say that we were going to talk about this. Strong openers. Openers in general are something that you should keep in mind. It really just boils down to unit quality. How strong is a single unit? The best way to know what units are strong or weak in the early game is watching pros and then being like, hey, they're buying this unit or they're buying copies of this and not holding on to that. So maybe I should do the same, right? In general, the best ones to get you out of the early game are Darius, Ahri, Yasuo, things like these are like the main ones I would say. Faded opener in general is really solid. The best opener actually in my opinion is actually using all of these units and playing 3 faded. Darius holds any AD items you have, Ahri holds any AP, Yasuo holds any tank. Really fucking solid. Like, it's disgusting. And then you just pair these two. Super nuts. Not okay. This is probably one of my favorite openers. It's really hard to hit though because you need a thresh. But nonetheless, even if with like a kindred, it's probably still pretty solid. And you just playing through the faded line, and that's totally okay. Another really solid line as well is the Story Weaver opener as well, which is Jax, Garen, Sivir, and I believe it's Teemo. So something like this. Really solid. You just get, because Jax 2 is actually just a very solid tank. Sivir, Ashe, and sorry, something like this. So this is, I guess it would be looking like this, and then eventually tech into trick shot. But Teemo is just such a solid unit, especially Teemo 2. This unit's a beast. It can item hold any AP items you want, and AP in general is just so much better than AD. So it's just so good. It's just so good. Kayle in general, for early tempo, people have asked before if blue or red is better for early game tempo. Shred is just something you just shouldn't really ignore. If you can get it in so early without sacrificing your item economy, then it's definitely something that you should consider. So definitely would consider playing something like this. It's super solid. You might also notice some pros might even do something like a positioning that looks like this. Basically, you're trying to get the Sivir buff onto everybody. It's a little greedy in terms of positioning, but it's totally solid as well. So that's something to keep in mind. In terms of other openers as well, these are the 2 main ones that I genuinely lean myself. Otherwise, you are just playing other things as well. You might sometimes see people play something like the behemoths with snipers in the early game. This is more like you're playing cog reroll though, but it's still solid enough that it can still get you by the early game, and then you can eventually pivot out into something else, maybe something like the Senna into the Senna Gnar line or other lines as well. But anyways, that basically does it for those lines as well. But we're done! We got through all the lines! Thank you guys for watching. If you missed out, if you tuned in halfway through, it's totally okay. This VOD will be thrown on to the YouTube. So you will have that there as well for the meta analysis. But thank you guys. Let's go run some games and happy climbing.